Welcome to the Education Next Generation Conference. We are your hosts. I'm Cecilia Hilke.
And I'm Jason Hilke.
And we are so excited today to have Scott Noelle with us. Scott is a coach, mentor, writer, and speaker. His passion is helping people develop their parenting, relationship, and self-empowerment skills so they can raise confident, connected, creative children. He collaborated with the late Gene Liedloff, author of The Continuum Concept, and Peter Gray, author of Free to Learn. He's currently working with Peter Gray to advocate for self-directed education. His background is as a voice teacher, helping adult singers overcome inner and outer obstacles to creative expression. And that has laid much of the foundation for his work as a parenting and life coach beginning in 2003. Scott created the Daily Groove, a free short daily email, when he realized that parents need reminders to change their way of thinking about children and parenting. He lives in Portland with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Scott. It's great to have you.
Welcome, Scott.
Great to be here. It's been fun meeting up with you guys and fun just to watch you talk about me.
Well, as we had talked about just before we started, we're subscribers of Daily Groove, and we really enjoy it. It's nice to put a face with the words and all the inspiration and everything that we get out of that on a regular basis. So we thank you on behalf of us and everyone else that gets that.
Right. And I just think it's so fun that you, and the two of you and myself and my wife both have the same kind of background in music and the performing arts. I just think that's not a coincidence that a lot of us in our early years, how we end up, we start out with a sort of creative lifestyle and then we end up creating a whole new paradigm of parenting and education. I think that's not a coincidence that a lot of the people that are interested in the leading edge of parenting and education are people who are we fancy ourselves to be creatives in general. A lot of the people that I meet that hire me as a life coach, I find out later that they're musicians or artists of various kinds. And I think the approach that we're talking about here, or that we'll be talking about today, is one that really lends itself to people who consider themselves creative in some way or another.
Yeah,
I agree. It's interesting to see that.
And I don't want to go down too much of a tangent by talking about myself, but it was actually I'd kind of gone a very traditional course academically and with jobs and everything. And it was as I became a teacher in a progressive school that I reignited my passion for being creative. It was through that process and becoming a parent that I realized, oh my gosh, there's this whole part of myself that I've actually let go of that I want to reintroduce myself to. So it's been a wonderfully creative process to be able to say hello to that part of myself again.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It's like that's when you picked up the new instruments and started the band and
yes. But let's not make this the Cecilia interview. Scott interview.
That's what everyone really wants to hear about. You're in a band? Cool.
So along the same lines.
An all-girl band.
Stop. So along those lines, Scott, harmony is kind of one of the things in your work and also in your creative expression. So do you want to talk to us about the role of harmony in your parenting philosophy or in your life?
Oh, well, so that's a very meaningful word to me. My wife and I met through an a cappella group. So vocal harmony is sort of a big thing. We love the idea of 2 voices coming together and co-creating something beautiful and harmonious. So, of course, that has become sort of a theme and a metaphor for how we relate with our children, how we relate with each other, et cetera, et cetera. We even have the word harmony engraved on the inside of our wedding rings. So that you touched upon something that means a lot to me and touches my heart. But harmony, I consider the theme of my work is the word that most embodies it is the word partnership, which of course a healthy partnership is a harmonious relationship. But to me, it's a kind of a mystical word in that a partnership is contains a paradox where the many and the one come together. So a partnership is creating oneness out of separateness. To the extent that we experience ourselves separately, we can also experience our oneness through partnership. And I think that's a really beautiful sort of esoteric, if you will, kind of way to look at things, to recognize that parenting is a spiritual journey as much as anything else.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Cecilia and I believe very strongly in our relationship being an important part of us raising a family, and we were lucky enough to have her family here nearby, so we've been able to do date nights from the time that our girls were very young, and that's really helped us in developing our relationship. I'm wondering, what kinds of things do you have practices? Do you have advice for couples that, they're on this journey of parenting, and as we all know who are parents, that it's not all that smooth, and that there's bumps in the road, and those bumps often show up in relationships. And it's probably the most common question we get from other parents is, how do I get my spouse to parent like I do? And I don't think they really mean like I do, but just how can we agree on the parenting? What kinds of things do you have as a practice with your family, or that you coach people with, to kind of smooth out those things and to create that harmony in their relationship?
Right. That's a great question. And I feel personally fortunate that my wife and I like to say partner because wife sounds like property, but my partner, Beth, and I have pretty much always been on the same page. And I think that's because we started with literally on the same page of music. And so that's just how we work with each other. But I would say a fairly significant portion of the calls that I get from parents are from a parent who is frustrated that the other parent doesn't really get the partnership approach to parenting. And more often than not, it's a mom, and the dad is sort of a traditional kind of more competitive mindset, more controlling. But it's not always that way. Sometimes it's the dad who calls me and says, my wife doesn't really get this partnership approach. And in fact, I always tell them, I said, if you guys are fighting about parenting style, I won't do a joint session with you. But I will do separate sessions with you, because if you do a joint session with, when they're fighting, you become the referee, and it's no fun at all. But sometimes the parents are on the same page, and they still don't really understand how to enact this paradigm of partnership with their children, because the society just doesn't give us strong models for how to do that. There's just not a lot of examples. How do I deal with this? How do we deal with that? Very specific issues where we're just sort of expected to fall into line with the control paradigm, and we haven't been given examples of what does this look like through the lens of partnership. And so that's a lot of what I help people to do. When there is one parent who is on board and the other parent really isn't, often I have an approach, I call it the unilateral approach, which is that one parent can make a difference. You don't have to have both parents completely on board in order to shift in the direction of a partnership culture within your family. And in fact, a good way to approach it is for the parent who's already aligning with partnership principles to treat the other spouse exactly the same way they treat their child, not to treat them like a child, but to treat them like a partner. And as you know, with children, partnership can be challenging because they're not old enough to have the intellectual construct of partnership as, the idea that we work together, that we compromise, that we co-create solutions that work for everyone. All that kind of stuff is sort of above the intellectual capacity of really young children. And so it's contingent upon the parent, the parent who is creating partnership, to really do the work of establishing the patterns of partnership and co-creativity, working with each other creatively to create solutions that satisfy everyone, that empower everyone, instead of taking power from someone or giving one's power away. So in the same way, you can do that with your child, just by being personally committed to creating partnership and having a partnership culture in your family. With your children, you can have that same commitment with your spouse. If they are operating on a paradigm of separation and control, then you can translate that in various ways. And maybe we'll want to get into some specific examples, but you can communicate with them in such a way that it pivots toward partnership. Actually, one of my daily grooves is called Pivoting Toward Partnership. So I'd be happy to talk about specific examples. Some of these ideas are a little bit abstract.
No, I think examples are so valuable. I think many people ask us often for examples, and we struggle on keeping that in mind. It's so much easier to talk theoretical and talk, but when it comes to actually doing the examples, I think people get a lot more. I know I get a lot more out of it. So if you have some examples, or if you'd like for us to throw some out, either way.
Throw them out.
So we had one family approach us and said, I'm in the car with my husband and the kids are in the back and they're fighting, and I start working with them to try and work out the problem. And my husband jumps in and just starts, telling them what to do and starts giving them ultimatums and, starts parenting from a punishment and reward strategy. And when I talk to him about it, he just says, I'm being soft on them. What do I do? That was like one of them that we recently had at a conference.
Okay. In 30 seconds or less.
I know. Put you on the spot here.
I mean, a lot of this, there are not panacea or simple push button kinds of solutions to these, because what we're talking about is a sort of a massive tectonic shift in attitude when your whole orientation is shifting from that I empower myself by being in control. That's sort of the old orientation. And the new orientation is I empower myself through connection and through partnership, through working with others, so that everyone feels more empowered rather than there's a winner and a loser. So you can't necessarily just have like a snap your fingers and that's in place, but you can move in that direction by using certain strategies that will just continually and gradually shift to more of a feeling of partnership, more of a pattern of partnership. So an example in the situation that you gave would be, I like to say that, so if I were dealing with my child, what would I do? Right. So if my child started trying to control the other child and threaten punishment of some kind, how would I deal with that? I certainly wouldn't yell at them, because that's obviously something that conscious parents are trying not to avoid. But one of the simple principles that I often go back to is that the reason partnership is empowering is because of connection. When you're connected to someone, then your power is connected to their power. So if you're disconnected, then when I have more power, you have less power. But if we're connected, then when I have more power, you have more power too. And so it shifts the conversation toward mutual empowerment. So obviously I'm not going to yell at the child or try to, threaten them or anything like that, because that's old paradigm stuff. But in the new paradigm, I'm going to think, okay, what I recognize is that the partnership in this situation is, it's weak. We're disconnected from the partnership because we're disconnected from each other. And so the first order of business is to find a way to connect. find a way to reestablish connection. And usually the simplest way to do that with a very young child, the simplest way is actually physical connection with touch. So you just pick them up and it suddenly changes the if you have a toddler in your arms, you can't have the same conversation that you have when they're down on the floor and you're looking down at them and waving your finger, right? So the most basic with very young kids is touch and physical connection. Beyond that is emotional connection, which is another word for that is empathy. So anytime you can create the experience in the other person that you can feel what they're feeling, that you understand what they're feeling, you understand their point of view, then suddenly they feel connected and it activates the partnership. So if you all have been into NVC, nonviolent communication, that's one of the main tools is empathy. And that's a very simple thing to do because all you have to do is move into curiosity. I wonder why that our partnership isn't active when it's such a delicious, wonderful relationship in partnership, right? It feels good. So why would it turn into something else? I'm curious. It must be that this person, this child or this partner is feeling disconnected in some way or is feeling disempowered in some way. I want to understand that. So you move into curiosity and you start to ask, maybe you're making a guess. Are you feeling upset about what happened earlier today? Did that thing with your friend throw you off in some way? You start to get curious and ask, and suddenly they realize, oh, this person is my partner. She cares about how I feel. She wants to understand me. And it totally changes the conversation. So those of us who practice that style of connecting with children, we know what that is, but we may not have realized that we can do the exact same thing with our partners. And to say, and rather than say, honey, you said you weren't going to yell. You shouldn't yell. It's bad. We've read that book that says yelling is bad. Threats and rewards and punishments are bad. You shouldn't do that. Like that, shooting on him isn't going to do anything to help him feel more connected and to help him feel that you're empathizing with him. So you have to sort of drop the I'm right and you're wrong thing if you want to shift into partnership, and to presume that if he were fully connected to his heart or to his center, he wouldn't be doing that. So there must be some reason why he's feeling or why he's moving in that direction. And then if you move into that curiosity, I really want to understand why. I know you love the children. I know you'd rather be in partnership with them than in a fear sort of relationship with them. So I want to understand what's going on. This is kind of what you're saying to yourself. You're not psychoanalyzing him right in front of the kids.
It never goes well.
But you might, if the kids are there, it's sometimes a little more complicated. But you might just get some sort of inspiration that would signal to him that you want to understand what's really going on and connect with him on a heart level. So it might be something like, I'm making this up on the fly here because this hasn't happened to me for a long time. It can be as simple as, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? Because I think we can solve this creatively. And but I'm wondering about that project at work you were telling me about. Has that really been stressing you out? And a lot of times it really is, like, your intuition will tell you, this isn't about the kids. This is about that thing that's going on with work where he's felt disempowered for the last week and a half, and you have to trust those intuitions and be willing to have the courage to take the conversation where it really should have gone in the first place, which is that if he were more connected with his emotional intelligence at that moment, he would have said, I'm having a really hard time with the kids right now because I'm already at my wit's end about this thing happening at work, right? So those are just some of the kinds of examples that of really getting down to what people are truly feeling, what needs they have that aren't being met, in what ways do they feel disconnected from their power or from each other or whoever.
That rings very true to experiences that we've had. And I hear a few things in what you said there. And I don't know if we want to go down any of these. It's so rich, everything you said there. And it just brings up like all these opportunities just to talk about. One of the things that just came to mind, I'll just sort of say that that I've really valued is out of our parenting and learning to speak in a compassionate way. We use nonviolent communication as well. We were lucky enough to teach at a school where that was the primary means of communication. So we got kind of facile at that. And
not that we're always perfect at it.
See, some of us are better than others, since Cecilia was kind of raised with it in her home. So she it sort of comes as a second language to her. But I've learned a lot out of it. And in doing that with our kids, it's really developed our relationship and our communication. Because like it's so true what you said. Like if we talk to our kids that way, we can talk to each other that way. We can talk to the world that way. And it's a whole form of communication that works, not just for conflict, but just for just being able to communicate. And
realizing that when we're in a win-lose kind of frame of mind, that's really a false dichotomy. That it just means that we haven't been creative enough. We gotta think outside the box a little bit more, or whatever. And one of the other things that I thought about was that, so that part of parenting is complemented our relationship. And then the part of our, that we worked on in our relationship that's kind of bled over into our parenting is imago dialogues and the style of, it's from Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt.
From their work. And, we did workshops with that for our relationship. And then all of a sudden we're now using some of those strategies and that same style of speech and communication with our kids. So it's been interesting to see how it's all the same. It's not just, one or the other. They're not in silos. Yeah. But it comes back to empathy and connection and partnership. And let's figure out how to do this together.
I've often referred back to that book by Hendricks and Hunt. I forgot the title now. There's one that's about parenting, but just that the big takeaway for me is this idea that often you get triggered by things in your kids when they do something that reminds you at some level of your own experience when you were that age. So you might have a great relationship with your kid until their puberty, and then suddenly they're a teenager, and all of this stuff, the drama that you had with your parents as a teenager comes, all that unresolved stuff comes to the front. And the takeaway for me is that you're not upset for the reason you think. You think you're upset about what's going on with your kid, when in fact really it has to do with this part of your power that you need to reclaim, and it's been missing since you were 13 or since you were 3. Because at the time you didn't have the wherewithal to process, emotionally and psychologically what was going on. So that kind of stuff is really important. If you don't mind, I want to make sure we have time to talk about education, because I think that's what this summit is about, right?
And
yes.
It's about parenting and education both. I mean, What we're trying to do is support parents and teachers on how to build these social and emotional skills and mindfulness skills. And some of the people, here are going to be parents, and some of them are teachers, some of them are homeschooling, some of them, are in traditional. And so they're trying to figure out how, in a traditional education, how do I build this at home? And how do I support my kids for this future that they're growing into that, has a lot of change happening, maybe more change than we've had in the past, especially with technology moving so quickly. And whether we're talking about a teacher-student partnership or a spouse partnership or a parent-child partnership, it's all kind of based on the same principles in many different situations.
Right. And I think just going back to that picture of the dad in the car who's frustrated and is turning sort of in a knee-jerk way to control tactics. I think a lot of that is really reinforced in conventional schooling, because conventional schooling, for the most part, is not a partnership system. It's a control system. And that, teachers, of course, are great. They, in their intentions, they really want to serve children, and that's something I really admire. That anyone, particularly those teachers who are willing to endure the bureaucracy and a lot of the crazy things that really undermine their ability to be in partnership with their students. That if you want to work with your students, and the system says you have to work on your students, you have to get them to pass the high stakes tests, et cetera, all of that stuff that's built into the control aspects of the system, really make it difficult to operate in partnership in a conventional schooling situation.
Yeah, we've gotten to interview a few people that have been kind of rebellious in that system and have heroic, and it's been really neat to see that even within, the confines of whatever systems are out there, that there are outliers, and there are people that have the courage and the bravery to do really beautiful, unconventional things.
And the strategies. I mean,
they
figure out ways to get it to work, and they bring in, different kinds of dialogue with their kids where they're really trusting in them and wanting to hear their opinions and treating them like equals, like they're a fire to be lit rather than an empty pot to fill up. And it's nice to see that. So I definitely, it's been encouraging to see the movement that I think that is occurring. And that's also part of the reason we put the conference together, because there were so many teachers that we keep bumping into. They're like, I'm trying to figure out how to do this, and it's hard. It's hard to figure out how to do it on my own, or I don't have the support, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it inside of the school system that I'm in. And I
or even in the preschool.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of preschool teachers, and this is pretty radical stuff, that when we talk about creating classroom agreements and letting the kids be in charge of the climate of the classroom, and what's that going to feel like? What's that going to look like? How do we solve problems together? Giving away, it feels like giving away the power, and it's scary. It's new. Do you want to talk to any of that?
Sure. Yeah.
There's no real question there.
How much time do you have? Well, it's interesting what you said about giving away the power, because it made me think about a sort of a cliche that, I don't know, this cliche about, when you give away love, it comes back tenfold. It's not, we live in this sort of story of scarcity, and we tend to apply it to everything, that everything that's good is scarce, and we have to hoard it in some way. And, obviously our money system is built that way. But things like love, like love is scarce. So if there's somebody that I love, I have to hoard them, and not let anyone else love them, as if love had those kinds of limits, and of course, the parents, as soon as you have more than one child, as soon as you have one child, you realize, I can, there's more love for me to give. Like there's no limit on how much I can love, other than, the time in the day. But somehow that scarcity mindset gets applied to power. Like power is this scarce thing. And how I wouldn't dare give any of it or allow anyone to take their power back if I have it, because power is scarce and I need as much as I can get. And in partnership, it turns that whole thing upside down. It's saying, if I want to not only not take your power away, but help you take back any power that has been taken from you or that you've inadvertently given away, that's not only not going to make me less powerful, it's going to make me more powerful through our connection. And so there's a trust challenge that comes up when you go from a traditional teacher-student type of a concept of the teacher has power over the student, and then when you say, well, what if the student was completely self-empowered? What if we gave the student the power to say yes or no? Like, well, we can't give the child a no, because then they would always just say no. And it seems to be true because children are so used to not having the option of saying no, that as soon as we give them the option, the first thing they say is no.
And they have to kind of test, like, is this really an authentic choice? Are you for real?
Right. And adults do a lot of things to kids that are disingenuous. Like, okay, I'm going to give you a choice between these two things, neither of which are your real, honest to heart, your heart's desire. So, children become kind of cynical about their power and their freedom, and they'll roll their eyes because they know it's not sincere when adults are saying they want to empower them. To really empower children, you have to say, you have to say two things. I want to know what your truth is. Like, are you a yes to this or are you a no to this? I actually care. And if you're a no, I am willing to honor that. I'm going to figure out how I can honor that. That's a radical thing in education, where the whole paradigm is that kids are pushed around all the time, and they're not. No one in the conventional system expects the children to be in charge of their own education in any way. And that's the radical thing that I'm advocating, is that not only can children direct their own education, they're designed by nature to do so. Mm-hmm. And this gets into the work of Peter Gray, who I believe you're also interviewing.
Yes.
And as someone that I'm working with to advocate for self-directed education.
So I want to get to Peter Gray, but I also want to ask you about what happens after the no. If the child is given a true choice, and whether it's a parent or a teacher, and the child says no, is there a conversation around that? What aspect of this doesn't work for you? Is it this? How can we, this is what, me as the parent or the teacher, this is what I'm concerned about. Talk about after the no first.
Okay. Well, first of all, there are some things where, because of our legal system, like there's just like I have a utopian vision where, there's room for every yes and every no. But in the meantime, we sort of have to deal with the society we live in. So, for example, if you say, this is hard to come up with this example, but let's say you're taking a classroom full of kids to the park, and the child says, I'm going to run across the street. You say, no, you can't. You have to wait for the light, and then we're all going to go across together. That's like, you can't give the child that no. Like, no, I'm going to go when I want. You can't. I mean, that's just not practical, even though it might be safe. Like if the child is actually self-aware enough to notice that there aren't any cars coming. But if the child doesn't want to obey that law, you're in a position as a teacher, you just kind of have to make them, like, you can't give them that choice. All right. So I'll just to acknowledge that there are things like that.
Yeah. I don't want to wear my seatbelt. I don't want to sit in the car seat.
Right. But there are so many other choices where there are possibilities besides just laying down the law. And those usually don't get explored because we're not in the habit of trying to honor the yes or the no. Lost my train of thought there. So
we were talking about how to honor that no, and there's certain times when not to, when it's not possible to, but when we
Right.
can honor that no, what happens after they say no?
Thank you. So after they say no, then what happens is that they said no. In other words, it's not really. It's just not a big deal. It's like, oh, that's what a consensual relationship is. That sometimes the person disagrees and they say no, and that's okay. Now, sometimes the no means something like, but if you say no, you don't want to go to the park and everyone else wants to go, then we have a problem because I'm not allowed to leave you here alone. Like that's, so sometimes the no, what comes next is some sort of creative problem solving. Like, I want to honor your no, but I also, have other things that I want to say yes to, and it isn't quite workable yet. So partnership really focuses on workability. It's a creative orientation. It's saying, okay, I'm not going to force you to do this, but if you don't, we haven't gotten to that place where we found something that works for everyone. And partnership says we're going to stay at the drawing board until we come up with that. And so initially moving into partnership, it feels a lot like we're always working stuff out. We're always processing. We're always, discussing everything.
Long.
Right. But over time, and that's a necessary part of the shift into partnership. But the more you master that skill, the more it's like you have a collection of strategies that get you to workability faster. And so I think that's a really important thing to recognize, is that moving into partnership is itself a process. That if you've been in a control paradigm forever, and then one day you say, okay, I'm going to try the partnership thing, and then you get to the first no, and then it's a pain in the butt to deal with the ramifications of the no. It's like, you see, partnership doesn't work. and that's just a short-sighted approach. What happens is that if you stick with it and you say, oh, this was really hard, but I feel really good about the creative solution we came up with, and I trust that we're going to get better and better at this, so that we can really have a truly consensual relationship where nobody feels dominated by another. That's, to me, that's the radical yet totally natural orientation that we want to have with children. It's certainly what we want to have with our adult partners, and nobody likes working for a company where the boss is a tyrant. If you have an employer who is partnership oriented and really cares about giving you work that also is satisfying, that works for you and for the company, like that's what a true servant leader provides, is that kind of leadership that is a form of partnership. And teachers can do that as well. And or parent teachers, homeschoolers can do that as well. Anyone can do that. I want to share a story about no, if I can, really quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
You don't have to do it really quickly either.
Well, because it's kind of off topic, but when my younger daughter was about 6, we realized that she would benefit from eating more protein. Like there were some reasons why we thought that, she would be happier and healthier and her brain would work better if she just wasn't getting enough protein. So it's like, for a while, we kind of got into more of a control orientation. We were constantly pushing the protein on her, right? And she built up these defenses so that she would just automatically say no. And because of our partnership orientation, we would try to honor that. But then eventually I realized, well, I just need to stop being so pushy and try to think less about pushing and more about the pulling quality of attraction. Like, how can I offer things that are attractive? And so on this particular morning, I made myself an egg, which of course is protein. And so I cooked an egg. I cooked it in the way that I know my daughter likes. And I offered her a bite. I said, hey, you want a bite of my egg? It wasn't like, you should eat a bite of my egg. You need more protein. Take this, whether you like it or not. It was just like, hey, you want a bite of my egg? And not surprisingly, she said, no. It was a knee-jerk reaction, though. And whereas before I would have gotten into a bit of a control struggle and tried to push my agenda, I just said, okay. Like, that was my response to the no. It's like, oh, that's a valid answer. And that was it. And I proceeded to eat my delicious fried egg. Well, and then, so I was kind of watching her out of the corner of my eye, and I could see her wheels spinning, and I could see her come to the conclusion that, wait a minute, I said no, just sort of out of this protective, defensive habit, you know, but I really actually like when Daddy makes eggs that way. And so a few seconds went by, and then she said, actually, I'd like a bite of your egg. And so we need to realize that when we give children the option to say no, they're definitely gonna say it, if not by habit, then, as you said, Cecilia, that they're going to need to test to make sure that we're serious, that you know, they really have a choice. And so sometimes they'll say no, even if the answer is yes, just to prove that they're not being controlled. And then once they realize they can let their defenses down, then that's when the good partnership stuff starts to fall into place and it gets fun.
Yeah. And when kids are given the opportunity to make their own choices, they really actually do make the choice that's going to be best for them in the long term. It's sometimes hard to trust enough to let the kind of process go from start to finish. But I do believe that they eventually choose the egg because they like the way that the protein feels when it gets in their body or whatever.
And the example you were giving of going to the park, just it rings very true to me just as preschool teachers. That was a conversation we had multiple times. And because of the kind of classroom we had in the school we were in, they did have that opportunity to say no. And it took some work on my part to get to that point of recognizing that what I'm really wanting to do is have that conversation about partnership and about the no than it is really about going to the park. I mean, that's ultimately what I want as a teacher, is for them to learn how to develop that partnership, for them to feel powerful, to have them feel like they're movers and shakers in the world. You know, that was the important stuff. And that gave me the freedom to be able to say, okay, let's have this conversation, rather than me having my agenda of like, we need to get to the park. And yeah, we got a lot of the kids here, and it's all about working that out. And that can be absolutely crazy. But for me to reprioritize that and to recognize that what really matters here is not the park, but that conversation. And it gave me some ease to be able to spend the time to do that. Now, I have to be honest and say that as a teacher, for whatever reason, it was easier for me to see that and to be able to spend that time as a teacher. As a parent, it continues to be a struggle of like me being willing to just have that conversation rather than, look, we got to go. And sometimes we do got to go, but me running my agenda is sometimes I put that as a higher priority than the conversation about the partnership or about the no with my own kids. So I try to bring that with me into my everyday as a parent. And I have something I want to follow up with that, but you wanted to say something?
Oh, I wanted to shift.
So this may be, if this is too far off, then, bring me back. But what you've said a couple times, and well, one time you said it and you've kind of hinted at it another time, is like, these are kind of tectonic shifts for people. These are not easy things. And I know for myself, these were kind of, I don't know if I say fundamental, but these are personal. These were like me doing personal work, and people say, you learn the most through your parenting. I learned the most from my kids. Well, I found that it's really been through parenting. I have learned a lot, and I've learned stuff from my kids, but it's mostly been about me having to do work on myself that has really had me change and be a different person. So in order to make these kind of big changes for some people. Personally, do you have resources that you guide people towards? Do you have strategies? How do you support people in making those shifts? Because it's not about like, okay, so you run into this situation, this is what you say as a parent. It's more about like taking a big step back and saying, like, what are my personal values? Who am I? Am I willing to look at myself and admit where I'm wrong, where I may not know the answer, where I need to be introspective, all of that. So anyhow, I'm going on, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that, because I think those are some of those things that aren't talked about often.
Well, in my early work with parents, I myself was early on in parenting, and this is something I think we were going to talk about anyway, so I'll bring it up now. But my first enthusiastic dive into parenting philosophy was through a book called The Continuum Concept, which basically looks at people in so-called primitive indigenous cultures and says, what does this tell us, that like their way of doing things is so different that it sort of defies what we think of as human nature. Like it makes you rethink, what is the most natural way to be? These people are living the way people evolved. They're living the same kind of social organization that arose naturally before this radical invention of civilization and cities and people living among strangers. Like that was never what we evolved for. So we don't have to get into that book. It's a book I recommend to every new parent, The Continuum Concept. But when we read that book, it really shifted, like it gave us a map, a way to think differently about what makes sense as a more natural approach to parenting, as something that works with human nature rather than against it. Because so much of conventional parenting approaches, so many of them are adversarial in some way. They're working against the kids, or working, using some sort of force. And that always felt distasteful to us. And so we said, well, there's got to be a better way. And then we discovered, there is a way if you understand, like, how would it be different if we lived in a kind of a tribal hunter-gatherer type culture? How would things look and feel and interact differently? So that sort of was the beginning. And I was I worked, before it was work, it was just a labor of love, and I was involved in doing online support and interacting with a lot of parents who were brand new to this idea. And the thing that I really found really struck me was that people thought, okay, so let's look at our ancestors or our primitive cohorts and see, and use that to guide what should I do differently? How can I do things more like a hunter-gatherer? And the problem is that people were asking, what should I do, rather than why would I do it that way? Mm-hmm. And what is it about the difference in the consciousness of our primitive, so-called primitive ancestors, that leads them to make different choices, different behavioral choices? And so that's where I became interested in that, rather than just telling people what to do, but having it wrapped around this consciousness that gives rise to control and adversariality. Let's go right to the source and identify what's really happening in our consciousness. What are the perspectives, the worldviews, the stories that we've been told about what it is to be human, that are leading to these kinds of really inhumane ways of relating with children. And so that's really what got me in the coaching business. I wanted to help people not just figure out what to do as parents, but to be able to change their consciousness so that what to do became obvious. Like it becomes easier and easier to generate partnership solutions when you have a partnership consciousness. And that partnership is the word that I use for the sort of the overriding consciousness of our ancient ancestors. You know, the people that we evolved from saw themselves as not only partners with their children and partners with each other, their tribe mates, but also partners with nature, partners with the gods, like connected. It was a consciousness of connectedness. And the stuff that we take for granted in this society, in our current modern culture, is that everyone is separate. Everyone is sort of an individual self in competition with all the other individual selves. And that leads to a lot of very different conclusions about, how you gain power, how you, what you consider success, what a good relationship looks like, and what kind of parenting makes sense, is very different when you have one extreme or the other in terms of partnership on one end and control and domination on the other. But it gets to be a very rich healing process when you start to question everything. It's like, why am I pulling the weeds from my yard? Like, why am I putting myself in opposition to nature? What's wrong with those dandelions? They're beautiful. And so you can question at every level. There's so many things that we do that are oriented around control, pushing against nature, pushing against human nature, and you can't change them all. Maybe you live where there's a home association and you have to pull the weeds from your yard, but there are so many ways that you can rethink the various things that we do, not only in parenting, but all of the different ways that we relate with life, and say, how could I relate with that aspect of life as a partner to it rather than in opposition of it? Or it's my enemy, or I have to control it, or it's going to control me. It's a very different mindset.
Yeah. And what I like about what you're saying is that there's not only research around that cooperation is our natural kind of way of being, that maybe didn't exist before, but even in like Darwin's work, when everybody refers to survival of the fittest, and the word love is all throughout his work, way more than the survival of the fittest, this notion of competition being our natural way of being. It's actually cooperation that is our birthright. So it just relates so much to what you're saying.
And this might be like a nice segue into the work you're doing with Dr. Peter Gray, seeing that I don't know what work you're doing, if it's related to this, but he did speak a lot about, the some of the ancient cultures and the way they cooperated. And so I want to make sure you had talked about wanting to get back to Peter Gray. So I also want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about what you're doing with him and some of your collaboration with him.
Well, I became interested in his work for obvious reasons, because it was so aligned with what I had already been studying in my work with the continuum concept. And even before that, Daniel Quinn, I was into his work. He's a proponent of the sort of the tribal mentality of what he calls, what I call a partnership culture. He calls a lever culture, as opposed to a taker culture. So there's a lot of different brilliant people that are thinking along these lines. And I recognized immediately when I saw Peter's blog and some of his writing that he was thinking along the same lines. So I had an opportunity 3 years ago. I was going to speak at a homeschooling conference, and it was near Boston. And I knew that he worked at Boston College. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could meet him there, because I have to go into Boston. And so I had the audacity to just introduce myself And I kind of used my connection to continuum concept as a sort of a name dropping, because I was friends with the author of that book, and he was interested, and he said, "Sure, why don't you spend a day with us?" Very, very, very lovely and personable man, and his wife is also really just, they're a lovely family, and so I got to spend a day with Peter and to talk about all these things, how the parenting is related to education and self-directed education, and the evolutionary psychology, which is his specialty. So we just had a good meeting of the minds, and then of course I didn't speak with him again for a number of years, but we stayed in touch through email, and then he was working on a project with some other advocates of self-directed education. He knew I was also on board with that philosophy. And so he invited me to join their group, and we're actually right in the middle of a sort of a surge of getting ready to launch an organization to support the whole movement of self-directed education. Sorry, there's a hummingbird right outside my window, and it's so sweet. That has never happened to me.
Oh.
That's why I have a special. I like hummingbirds. I have a special place. I grew up in the mountains for a while, and I spent a lot of time around the hummingbirds, so I can appreciate that. You guys are ready to launch this this project, this on self-directed education.
Yeah. I'm not gonna give any details, because we're kind of planning a big celebration and a launch of I don't know, but it is an advocacy organization for self-directed education. And one of the things we did in this group was to clarify when we talk about the word education, we mean something very different than what a lot of people think. If you go to sort of average Joe on the street and you say, what do you think education is? They'll say, well, it's going to school, right? I mean, most people associate school with education. But Peter has this really different perspective, because as a person who's done a lot of work with anthropologists, he recognizes that education broadly means something different. It means the process by which a culture is transmitted from one generation to the next. And obviously there are some cultures that don't have schooling, and they still transmit their culture. So we came up with a way of expressing that education, rather than defining it in terms of schooling, we define it in terms of this process of acquiring skills and values and knowledge that are necessary to have a successful and meaningful life, and that furthermore, that educational process is designed by nature to be self-directed. That's why children don't need walking lessons and talking lessons. They just learn from a very young age that whatever seems to empower the adults around them is something that they're curious about, and they pick it up just by observing and by experimenting, by playing with those things, and they don't have to be forced. They only have to be forced when somebody else decides that they should learn at a particular way at a particular time, or a particular focus that may or may not be that individual's proclivities and their reason for existing. I like to think that everyone is different because, or the fact that everyone is different, has slightly different temperaments, has slightly different levels of ability in different ways, means that not everyone was intended to learn the same things. That it makes more sense in terms of the broader purpose of life for people to engage in those things that they're born with the ability to do. So a person like me who had some musical aptitude when I was young, to have had more time just exploring music when I was young would probably have been a lot better than taking some of the classes that I hated. So broadly self-directed means the child, the self, knows what their natural inclinations are. And if you create an environment where that is trusted, and that trust then allows them to go toward those things that they're naturally attracted to, that education just happens. You don't have to impose it on the child.
That sounds like a cool project. I'm excited to hear more about what you guys are working on, because I get the self-directed education, the way you speak of it, rather than maybe a more conventional sense of self-directed. I get what you're saying. I'm sorry. I interrupted you, I think.
No, you're good. I wanted to...
Don't they have a great partnership? They're so tuned into each other and really wanting each other's needs to be met. It's just so...
I'm lucky, that's all. I got her. So.
We're both lucky.
Yeah, right.
I was curious, Scott, for you to talk. We talked a lot about partnership in the beginning. And I know that your parenting philosophy has 3 other parts, if we break down the acronym PATH.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked a wee bit about trust, but would you talk and kind of fill in the other parts of that acronym?
Sure. Well, at one point, I thought, I've been writing the Daily Groove for a while, and each time I'd just sort of take a different aspect of parenting, a different aspect of this sort of partnership philosophy, and write about it. And then at one point, I took everything that I'd written, I tried to distill it down to something like that would sort of encapsulate the main themes of everything. And in doing that process, I came up with, obviously, partnership was the major theme, but that there were 3 others, and it so happened to make a nice acronym, which is the word PATH, P-A-T-H. And so those other 3 are authenticity, trust, and heart. And partnership is the main thing. You can even see that authenticity is like sort of being in partnership with yourself. Mm-hmm. and there's obvious connection between trust and partnership. There's an obvious connection between heart and the feeling of partnership. So they're all complementary. But I found that it helps to sometimes shift the focus. So, and we talk about these 4 principles as pathways to power. So partnership is a pathway to power through connection, as we've already discussed. Authenticity is a pathway to power through alignment. And specifically what that means in terms of an individual being authentic is being in alignment, having alignment between the different aspects of yourself and the different layers. So my innermost being and my outer behavior are in alignment. The things that I say and the things that I do are in alignment, and the things that I feel. And so we talk about that as being something that really brings power to an individual, and certainly to communication and relationship as well. The third pathway is trust. Is a pathway to power through understanding. And by trust, I don't mean the kind of trust where you say, all right, you make a promise and I trust you to keep it. Like, that may or may not apply, but we're talking about the kind of trust that you have when you understand something. Like, if there's someone that I don't know, I've never met them, I don't have a basis to trust that person. But if I really get to know that person, I feel like I can trust, I know what to expect. Like, I'm not as nervous about that person because I can trust that, if it's Joe, he always gets the job done and he always gets it done 15 minutes late. Like if that's like, if you know and understand a person, that's just how that person operates, right? So I can trust that. So that's sort of interpersonal trust. But there's also trust on a deeper level, and I like to divide it into 3 categories. Trusting human nature. So in other words, sometimes, like you say, well, suppose I let my child self-direct their education. I don't trust that. Like, I've been trained not to trust that. But if you gain a new understanding of human nature, if you study some of these things about hunter-gatherers and how people behave differently when they're in a partnership system, then that understanding helps you let your defenses down and trust that allowing self-direction could actually work, for example. So that's an example of trusting human nature. Another aspect of trust is trusting yourself. In other words, we've been trained, especially through school, coercive schooling, we've been trained to not trust ourselves. And coercive parenting does the same thing. If a child says that I don't want to do that, I don't want to, and they say you have to, you should. Of course you want to do that. That all good people want to do that. Like, you get these sort of contradictory messages that say you should trust me more than yourself. And imposed education does the same thing. It's like, well, I know you're interested in Minecraft, but I think you should be interested in this, and the underlying message is you shouldn't trust your own impulses. Even though this might be a person who, they're playing Minecraft that day is going to plant the seed of them becoming the world's best mechanical engineer or something, whatever that may be. But that we get constant messages: don't trust yourself, trust some external authority. So trusting yourself kind of goes back to the concept of authenticity, that you not only can align with yourself, but before you can get into alignment with yourself, you have to trust yourself. And that means paying attention to what you feel inside and learning how to interpret those feelings in ways that you can trust. It's telling you something real and true about yourself. And the third aspect of trust is, in a more general, broad sense, trusting life. And I think that's kind of almost a spiritual perspective, the idea that you can learn to trust life. And that, in fact, we come into the world trusting life. Babies are completely trusting. They completely put their faith in you to take care of them. And it's only because of various things that we do to children, and the things that the messages that are the constant, coming from parents, coming from teachers, and coming from the media, that are constantly saying you can't trust life. Life is out to get you, and so we do all these things that then orient toward. We have to try to have power over life. We have to try to, I was just watching an episode of Doctor Who, and it was this guy that was trying to create like a fountain of youth type of a technology. And, this whole idea of like, if we can control life itself and, overcome death, it's like, that's not trusting the life process. And so much of modern life, so much of the paranoia that parents go through and have to experience because society is breathing down your neck saying, what? You let your child walk to the park on their own? What are you, crazy? It's like, well, no, I trust life. But in some cases, you can get put in jail for trusting life. So it's a challenge to move into trust. Anyway, I can go on and on about that forever. The fourth pathway to power is heart. And heart is a pathway to power through unconditional love. And I probably don't need to go in great detail, but it is, I find it kind of like the shortcut. Like it's the thing that where you can bypass all kinds of drama and just go immediately to love for no reason at all. That's what unconditional love is. Like a lot of people, they get to love through all kinds of drama. It's like, well, I can't experience love until so-and-so loves me, or until so-and-so apologizes, or blah, blah, blah. There's all these different dramas that we create around whether or not we get to experience love. And unfortunately, a lot of parenting is, it sort of reinforces that idea that love is conditional, because you only get the experience of love if you behave correctly. Unconditional love is something that is available to anyone at any time. It's yours for the taking. You just have to decide. And because nothing really stands between you and making that decision, it is this sort of magical power that everyone has. You can just decide to be a lover just because. And all of those reasons why you should be angry can just drop instantly through the practice of unconditional love. So those are the four major categories of empowerment that I focus on. And that, of course, they're all connected to partnership. Because we're talking about relationship with children, that's why I focus on partnership.
I like those different kind of lenses, I guess, or ways of looking at empowerment. I kind of laughed when you called it the unconditional.
Superpower.
Yeah, it's like it's magical, unconditional love. It's like and it's free, like you said, and it's magical. The effect it has on us, the effect it has on other people. I just kind of laughed at that, and it just sort of struck me. It's like, yeah, it's like magic. And love is like that. But those four lenses of partnership, authenticity, trust, and heart. So I can really I can see how valuable those could be in different ways of approaching, and not necessarily like as steps, but as lenses to look at empowerment.
Right. And also when you feel stuck, you can just cycle through those four things. It's like, I've gone off the path. How do I get back on the path? PATH. It's like, okay, try partnership. Am I feeling connected? And we talked about all the different ways you can reestablish connection if that's what's the issue. Maybe that's something you can't overcome. And then you can say, well, okay, authenticity. Am I being true to myself? Is there something I'm not being honest with myself about? Am I saying one thing, but really feeling something else? And that can be a pathway back to your power and back to a powerful feeling in relationship. And so you can cycle through all four of those. And I find that it's impossible to not come up with some good idea that's going to move you back to where you want to be just by asking those four questions.
Yeah. See what's missing, put it in place.
Yep.
And none of those are scarce. They're all unlimited resources.
You got it.
Yeah. We've come full circle, I feel like.
Scott, we should probably wrap up. I feel like we could talk for a while about this. I mean, there's so many. We really enjoyed this conversation with you. I'd love to have a part 2 follow up. This has been great. Do you have any asks or requests of people that are at the conference as we wrap up here?
Sure. Well, I don't know if it's an ask. It's more of a receive. But I do like to share. So anyone who resonates with the kind of things we're talking about here, and maybe likes this idea of creating a groove where you live in the mindset of partnership, then I would certainly invite those people to subscribe to the Daily Groove. It's free, and all you have to do is head on over to dailygroove.com and click on subscribe. So it's a really a great way to introduce yourself to some new ideas. It's designed for parents. But even if you have grown children, or you don't have any children at all, you can apply it. Like if you're a teacher but you don't have kids, it will certainly help you in that respect. So the principles apply to every type of relationship. The examples tend to be examples of, parents and children. So that would be my number one invitation. And then of course, I do offer private coaching sessions. So that's something you can also find information about on my website, dailygroove.com. And sometimes people feel like they're dealing with a specific challenge that they just want to reflect off someone who lives and breathes this sort of partnership paradigm, and to help them see it through that new lens. And that's one of the things I really enjoy doing.
Great, good. We'll include links to those as well as part of the notes for this. But we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, to impart on us so much wisdom that you have. And
I also want to say the Daily Groove emails are great for beginners. They're great for people who are advanced. Like, as much as I try to live and breathe and read and study and practice these principles, I continue to be like, when I get your emails. So I just love them.
It's not just for people that are new to this. It's been around for a while. So I know many parents who subscribe to it and just get so much out of it. So thank you for what you provide to the community by doing that and making for a better world.
Yeah. Thanks for telling me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. We'll talk to you later. All right.
All right. Bye. It's been a pleasure.